Hi everyone, and welcome to the Dynamics 365 Practice Show. For today's show, we have Jackie Simens, Senior Consultant, Hitachi Solutions America, and we'll be discussing how to run offshore teams, nearshore, offshore, remote, any of these type of labels for this type of scenario. We'll discuss them and what she's found that's worked effectively, and we'll talk about change management as part of a software delivery and the critical importance of making sure change is built into every one of your projects. But before we get underway, I just want to talk to you about field service. In particular, the way MapTasker, an ISV I'm working with, harness all the power of Dynamics 365 field service and then extend it further with Field Engineer for Dynamics 365, a solution they provide. It's built specifically for companies that run field engineers. It allows them to gain access to detailed geospatial data from other internal systems. I especially like the opportunity it creates to bring advanced geospatial data from platforms like Esri, ArcGIS straight into Dynamics 365. I've done many projects that require Esri integration, and MapTasker would have made my job a lot easier. MapTasker's Field Engineer for Dynamics 365 not only allows you to access data from platforms like Esri, but also right back to it, completing the cycle of data collection in the field. For more information on integrating Dynamics 365 with advanced geospatial systems, head over to maptasker.com and contact the MapTasker team today for a demo. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guide.com/138. Now let's get on with the show. Hi Jackie, welcome to the show.
Hi there.
Good to have you on. Before we get started, where do you come from and who do you work for?
Oh my gosh, where do I come from? Well,
Start with the origin story.
oh goodness. So I grew up all over. So born in Australia and then moved to Indonesia for many years and then Nigeria, and my parents lived in Thailand, and I spent some time in Switzerland and then Colorado, and now downtown Los Angeles is my home. I've been in at least the CRM space for the past 5 or so years, probably a little more than that. But I've been working with Hitachi Solutions based out of their Irvine office for the past 3 years. So Hitachi Solutions is a global Microsoft implementation partner, and we basically only focus on the Microsoft stack. So I got into this because I'm actually a math nerd. That's what I did my undergraduate and graduate degrees in. And so I just like solving puzzles, and Dynamics lets me do that. So that's kind of the background story.
That's so interesting. I want to highlight one thing there, and that was you mentioned Nigeria. And why I find that interesting is that I've been working recently with a bunch of people from Nigeria, helping them getting their community around Dynamics and the Power Platform established. And there's about 20 to 30 people involved already there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that really surprised me.
That does kind of surprise me because when I was there, oh gosh, it would have been 2008, like 2007, 2008. And of course, I was young and not actually in tech yet. But yeah, I think that's great to hear. You know, a lot of people probably look at that part of the world and, you know, think danger or whatever, but no, everything's great. Like they're progressing pretty astonishingly, I would say.
Yeah. So how long did you live in Nigeria?
I was there 3 years. My family was there for 4, but at the time the high school only went up, schooling only went up to 8th grade. So I had to leave to go to boarding school. That's how I ended up in Switzerland. I couldn't stay there.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. So what caused you to travel so much when you were younger?
So my dad was working in oil, and so we moved every, 3 to 5 years, mostly in Southeast Asia. But yeah, it was a really great experience. I mean, I obviously can't compare it to a traditional childhood, but it was fantastic. I got to interact with multiple cultures and kind of see the world.
I bet. What's been your favorite country to live in so far?
So I'm going to have to say Switzerland, but I think that's because that's really where I grew up. That's where I did my high school years, and I was independent from my parents and kind of figuring it out for the first time. And I got to travel to other European countries very easily via train. But in terms of like Asia, because I spent most of my life on that continent, I mean, you can't beat Thailand.
Wow.
Thailand is just luxury,
I've never been to Thailand, and my wife has, and it's one of the places she's like, I've got to take you there. It's just amazing.
Oh, it is. It's beautiful, great food. People are always happy. It's wonderful.
Wow, I'm looking forward to it. Tell me, you've been in Los Angeles, how long now?
About 4 years. I've been downtown Los Angeles for about 2, and a lot of people don't like downtown, but I love it.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. And when we were talking earlier, you mentioned Six Sigma. I saw somewhere Six Sigma. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So the fancy term for process improvement. So Six Sigma, I looked into that quite a bit. I think I have a certificate on it, but it's really just how you can reduce defects and make sure that your process is optimal, really. It goes through a typical cycle. It's define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Why it's mostly used in manufacturing, but how I leverage Six Sigma, not in like the classic sense, but I leverage it kind of at work with OCM and change management. I really like to think about how we can improve a process, and then how I use it in change management is I like to obviously define the change, measure it, analyze how we're going through the process of getting someone onboarded to CE or F&O, improve it. But then, the big thing really is measuring so that you know if you're improving or not, and then you can adjust and adapt. So Six Sigma is pretty cool. It kind of encompasses a lot of improvement or change concepts into one.
Interesting. I'd not heard about it. I didn't know whether it was a Japanese, had its origin in Japan, because it sounds very similar to Kaizen and standard operating procedures and things like that. But you did mention OCM. What's OCM?
Oh, organizational change management. Sorry, I'm using the business slang.
I hold myself to account on using acronyms and not educating people on them. So I always like to pull out so anybody listening goes, I have no idea what she just said, but now they do. Awesome. One other thing, you mentioned there that in your childhood you're a math nerd. Tell me, did that translate into university? Were you in STEM related courses at uni?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So my degree is in applied mathematics. And so I just math all the way. I think that's why I liked learning about Six Sigma, because it really is a statistical analysis, to be honest. I mean, you can do it without the math, but it definitely tickled my brain in that area. So I'm a logic chick. I go from point A to point B to point C. I, at one point, could do differential equations and heavy calculus. And if you Google me with the word insulin resistance, I do have a paper that was published.
Wow, that's so good. That's so good.
Yeah, but that feels like a lifetime ago. I don't have those math skills anymore, sadly, but I think my brain still thinks mathematically.
Yeah. So how did you end up getting into dynamics?
Serendipity. So I had graduated. I was thinking about going into biomathematics. Obviously, that would have required, like 8 more years of schooling, because the biomath that I was looking into was medical based. And, I was looking at that and I liked it, but really my passion was solving puzzles. And so I'm like, I don't know if this puzzle is worth to me hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. So I started looking for jobs that let me solve puzzles. And I had a little coding background. I am not a coder, but I had written a few scripts. And so I applied for some developer jobs, which in hindsight was kind of a joke. I am not a developer, but somebody saw my resume and they're like, okay, here's a chick with logical skills who's thinking about tech. Obviously, we're not going to hire her as a developer, but let's have her come interview. And that person was Greg Gant. He is a coworker of mine now at Hitachi, but he hired me as a different partner. And he basically told me in the interview, he's like, yeah, you're not going to be writing code. I want you in front of customers figuring out how they do their business and doing process maps and solving their problems, solving puzzles. And I'm like, great, sign me up. I'm solving puzzles all day, every day. So that's kind of how I got into this industry, even though it's low code, no code, Yeah.
So good. One of the things I wanted to discuss with you, we're going to focus on two things as we chat here. One is around mobilizing offshore teams, and the other is around change management. And to start with, tell us about your experience with working with offshore teams.
So, I try at Hitachi to have mostly offshore teams working with me. So, my experience is minimal, but also large. I guess it kind of depends on who you ask. And overall, my experience has been really positive. I don't necessarily think of offshore teams versus onshore. I think of it a lot more as, and I actually get this terminology from Tom Galambos, our president and COO at Hitachi Solutions, but it's remote consultants, right? You're either client facing and, the face to the customer, or you're a remote consultant, or a remote developer. So you can be based out of Greenville, which is where one of our offices are, or you can be based out of Hyderabad in India. And to me, you provide similar skill sets and are just as amazing. And I need to be accommodating to your schedules, regardless of where you live geographically. So that's kind of how I approach offshore teams. I try not to label them that way. It very much comes across as like, let's just throw something over to the offshore team. But when you think about it as just a remote, I think your level of detail and understanding is far different.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've worked with offshore teams extensively, set them up myself. In my case, the Philippines, which were they were part of the company that I established them as a remote office. And one of the things was, in working in Australia at the time was this kind of, there was a perception that it wasn't consulting unless it was in the same office as the customer. How do you handle when customers go, or do you address it before it becomes a question? I want to see the consultant working at this desk in my business to know that they're doing their work type thing, which is the old way of thinking. A lot of companies still have that mentality of, I need to see somebody, otherwise I don't know if they're working. How do you address that?
I think that's still very much the stigma, but how we combat it is I'm very much one of the traveling consultants. So I am that face, but I make sure that, my offshore or my remote team is dialed in on everything. So we make sure that the stand-ups are at an appropriate time. So even though I might be face-to-face with the client, the remote team is dialed in. Maybe I'm doing a process mapping discussion and I'm going to dial them in on the phone. I try to keep them as engaged as possible. And then I really also delegate a lot too. So the current project that I'm working on, our QA lead is based out of Hyderabad. And I make it very clear, with the client when I'm there face to face, that anything QA or bug or any defects have to go through her first. And so I kind of set the tone with the customer. And then, obviously behind the scenes, I'm empowering her and being like, okay, you got this, But yeah, she's killing it. She just really needed the reassurance and the customer is going to trust who they see. And if you're not messing it up, they're going to trust you. Thankfully, I'm not messing up, so they trust me a little bit. And I just tell them this is how it's going to go. And she hasn't let me down. I love working with her, the offshore consultant.
No, it's good. So you mentioned stand-ups there. And one of the things and I don't know if you run a full agile methodology around project delivery, but one of the things are, the daily stand-up, and how do you make sure, one of the three things of the daily stand-up is, what did you pretty much do yesterday? What are you doing today? And are there any impediments, right? What needs to be addressed? But one of the features of it is you can eyeball each team member and you get the visual comms, like the other person rolling their eyes when that person says something, or, the disbelief on the claim that's been made for the completion time. How do you address that in remote scenarios?
I think I mean, it's tough, right? So the best scenario with Scrum is you literally put everything down and you stand up and you're in a circle and maybe you even throw a ball around, right? Like we all know some of the classic Scrum techniques.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
what we do is I just try to keep aware of the cultural differences. So one example is North American consultants are just stereotypically a little more blunt, a little louder, like they're going to probably take themselves off mute faster, you know? So
that surprises me. Not at all, yeah. So true.
But with our India offices, they're very reserved and maybe waiting their turn, and you got to break that. Right. So what we try to do is we'll kind of go round robin. And then we also have, at least with my project, I have a smaller subset. So without the client, we meet once a week. And I basically say, you know, I call them out one-on-one, like what's actually happening. So we do that as well. But with the scrums or daily stand-ups, really, we kind of call people out. So if something's being said where, like if I'm eye rolling, I don't just eye roll and let it go. I'm going to be that North American stereotype where I take myself off mute and be like, what are you talking about? So really that kind of, I guess one of the things that I wanted to talk about was some strategies about working remote. And really all that I'm trying to say is being overly communicative. So when you work in an office, you have that luxury of seeing someone eye roll or, you know, meeting them for coffee and picking their brain. And in order to make that sort of interactions work in a remote environment, you really have to become human and you have to tell stories and really collaborate on like a personal level with people. So I always look for things that I can build rapport with my remote team. So maybe that's, you know, so like I'm trying to think of a story. So like this one person that I know is always traveling home to see his family. And, you know, I put in the little bit of extra effort to remember to, you know, ask him about his time when he was with his family, things like that. Like all of those water cooler type conversations, you need to force yourself to have them, even if it means picking up the phone and calling your remote worker just to catch up. I have a non-work related call scheduled with that QA lead for every 2 weeks where she's getting, you know, a chai tea from the cart down the street. I'm getting my morning latte and we just talk. We, you know, it's not about work. It's about building a relationship of trust. And so that's really how I think remote environments can be totally successful, but you have to put in that effort of communicating via phone and being human and sharing aspects of your life. Then people are going to go the extra mile for you.
Yeah, so good, so good. Do you not have video on? Are you using like Teams as your main communication tool or what, for particularly around stand-ups? So using video?
We want to. We haven't fully adopted it yet, but it's definitely on my radar. I do like using video, but at times, depending on where your remote office is, the internet quality might not be as great. So I think for like North America video conferencing, that works totally fine. I just know that if I try to video conference with some of our India offices, depending on if it's rainy season or not, you know, it might not be top quality. So bare minimum is just sharing stories and being a human. But that would be the dream, right? If we could get top speed internet in all locations, then of course the video would be on 24/7.
Yeah, for me it was a game changer. Turning video on just brought the teams together so much better.
Totally.
Than without videos. The other thing we found worked very well was for the first week of a project kickoff, we would bring the remote staff on site from wherever they were in the world. We wrote that into the cost of the project, and it created a bond that, you know, for a 9, 12-month long project, absolutely bound the team together.
I love that. I mean, if we could do that, that would be great. I just know that at times there's visa constraints or things
Totally.
outside of our control. So what I've been playing around with is, if my counterparts in India aren't able to travel to the customer site for whatever reason, but I'm going to travel over there and spend a sprint with the team and, share as much as I can. It's just getting the team together at some point. Doesn't have to be at the customer site. It could be at the closest office to everyone.
Yeah. What about cultural training? Do you do any cultural training with that team? And what I mean by cultural training is that, so when I had my team in the Philippines, right, I would go through and teach them Australian humor, Australian work ethic, Australian time things, right? So they wouldn't get offended with like a brash comment, which might have been a throwaway comment by, an Australian counterpart on the team, which was every comment. Let's be real here. So, but we did the training both ways. Then I put all my Australian team through, and by that time I had a team of 70 odd people, and so I would put them through, in my case, Filipino training, culture to understand. So, for example, in Philippine culture, they don't like it if you confront them in front of somebody else. In other words, there's no way to save face. So it's a key thing to learn to take it offline rather than, address it. Even if a person is non-performing on the team, a Filipino employee generally won't tell you because they'll rather, cover the person or save face for them than go, this is a person letting us down or the weakest link often. And so there's that whole culture understanding. You're working with a totally different, belief system, upbringing, that type of thing. How does that feature in your work?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's challenging, right? First step is awareness. So what I do I just tell the India offices, you're never going to, I guess, be in trouble or like, I'm never going to be upset with you if you communicate to me early and often. So that's kind of what I tell that group of people. And they almost always will come to me and it will be one-on-one, and I'm okay with that. With the North America side of the house, I basically have to set expectations because their mindset is very old school in that let's just send the requirements, over the Pacific or whatever, and just let them do it, and it'll come back and, they'll complain about quality or something like that. And so really the change management for me is more on the North America side, talking about how they are your peers, you need to collaborate, things like that. I do have a funny story about communication though. So
okay, tell me.
I was on Teams pinging this person on a previous project who's based out of the Hyderabad office. And she was telling me, we were just, I hope not to swear, but we were just like shooting the shit, like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we were just, and she said something like, oh my gosh, this customer is adding way too many defects that are out of scope. And I responded with, you're telling me, and she's like, you're telling me what?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and it's like little things like that where you're like, oh, I'm using slang,
exactly.
Even though I don't realize it. Another thing I said was to a different person, our dev lead, I pinged him, FYI, huge work coming down the pike, your plate's going to be full. And he responded with, no, thank you. My tummy is full,
Yeah.
But I looked at that message and I was like, Jackie, you sound ridiculous. None of this makes sense. Like FYI. So you're using an abbreviation coming down the pike. I'm pretty sure that's a term for like people in New Jersey and New York. Yep. Like, how do I even know this?
Yeah.
And,
it's definitely an American saying, right? I mean, I've heard it from movies or something like that, but that's it.
Yeah. So, just kind of, and both of those people were able to joke with me, I think circling back because we had that rapport. I know if we didn't, they'd be like, what is this crazy chick talking about? So just being careful about those things. Another thing that comes up quite a bit is national holidays being different. So I coach the teams if there is a national holiday that, nobody can be on top of everything all the time. Like, I wish I could, but we can't. And so I tell our India counterparts to post in our general channel on the project team site, FYI, Friday's a national holiday. We won't be in the office. Like, so they have to remind me. And I'm like, love it. Enjoy time with your family. Thanks for letting me know. If they didn't, we would just sit there and be like, where are they? What's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, communication is a funny one for sure.
Yeah. It is so important. I found the national holidays exactly the same. Philippines have a heap of national holidays.
Yes.
And the thing is that, you're a company. Then they're not just like, people at your beck and call. They're part of your business, and therefore it's important to respect that, whether it be a religious holidays or otherwise as well. I really liked the thing you highlighted there, that you set up a non-work related call. That seems so smart, How do you kind of codify that into your North American culture, so it's not just you that's smart and does something like that your entire team does something like that? How do you make that happen?
I wish I could take credit for this, but it really is Hitachi North America culture that I'm trying to spill over into our India offices. So we are all set up super remote. And so the only time that we're able to sync with our actual management hierarchy, because our project hierarchy, we're talking to them all day, every day. But the actual management is scheduled with these one-on-ones. You'll literally put time on people's calendars and it'll be, Jackie plus Flemmy one-on-one or whatever. And in the India offices, they don't work remote. They actually go into the office. So they meet with their management team face to face. And so I went over there last year and kind of realized that's one of our communication gaps. So in North America, we can work with ourselves pretty well remote, but with our India offices, they're used to FaceTime. And so I just basically said to my team, I'm like, hey, I want to have this similar relationship with you guys. Let's just get on the phone once every 2 weeks, maybe even once a month, and just touch base. And, they'll tell me funny stories about the office, and, I'll tell them funny things that's happening in North America, and maybe they don't understand it. But yeah, it works pretty well. I think originally for Hitachi, it's, like I said, kind of our management structure, like how you interact with your management team and et cetera. But we actually use it way beyond that. So I have one-on-ones with people I consider mentors. I have one-on-one calls with people I just want to pick their brain. Like, maybe they're not a mentor per se, but they're a peer and I want to learn and collaborate. So I'm just really extending that to our India offices.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Are there any kind of challenges that you've come across with remote teams and kind of how did you overcome them? You've got any examples?
Well, I mean, the biggest one, and I've kind of touched on it a little bit, is, so I'll use the terms that I don't like, but onshore versus offshore. I think that there's some onshore biases that still exist. So
for example,
onshore, it might be, okay, let's just write up the spec, throw it over to them, and then it's going to come back perfect. And it's very much, it's not team mentality. It's, offloading work mentality. So that's really like the biggest challenge I see with offshore teams, kind of making the onshore team don't feel threatened. If you give the offshore teams a lot more empowerment and say like business process mapping and things that are not strictly code related, your onshore team gets nervous because clearly the offshore team's cheaper, so there's some change management that has to happen onshore first. And so what I try to do is I look for the WIFM. So that's another acronym. It's what's in it for me. That's part of Change Management 101. Yeah, so WIFM. So when I talk to resistors that are onshore, I basically have to explain, there are tasks that are potentially repetitive, or there is design that is far more challenging or rewarding for them as an individual. And in order for them to get to that, challenging and fulfilling part of their job, they have to support their counterparts that are offshore. And that means either, knowledge transferring some of the new techniques that they have, or doing code reviews, or even doing design collaboration. And so that's been the hardest part. I think if I isolate just for offshore teams, what's challenging is getting them over that initial hump. Like whenever I work with a new individual based out of India, it really is getting them to that first point where they escalate something to me and it's okay. Once you get past that point, things kind of run smoothly. And so how I get over that challenge is I basically just continue to call or ping them until they finally fess up.
Yeah, cool.
If anyone sits around and, waits for someone, it must be, this is kind of a super stereotype statement, but most Asian cultures, I think, are not going to ring the alarm at the first sign of, issues. And so in order to combat that, it's a simple thing, right? Ping them every day. Hey, how's it going? How's this task going? Do you have any issues? Like asking the important questions, like, are you blocked? What keeps you up at night? Like, what is giving you anxiety? And then let's solve it and get on with it.
Yeah. One of the things you talked about there was, this concept of throwing requirements over the fence and, and getting them to execute. And particularly in organizations I worked with years ago, that was very common where we had,
Totally.
In Vietnam, we had 300 resources, and one company I was in, another one had like 500 resources, and it was pretty much, we'll write the requirement spec, we'll send it off, they'll have their own project managers there, they'll make an interpretation, and we'll get something back, and inevitably it wasn't the thing.
Of course.
What I understand here is that you actually involve them in the requirements gathering as well. Is that right? Like that is via remote sessions?
Yeah. So that can be harder, but I try my best to, have them dial in. Sometimes it won't work with time zones or whatever. But what I definitely do is, so my background, I'm a senior consultant with Hitachi. I'm playing architect on my project right now, but I'm a functional architect, meaning I can identify probably if it's JavaScript, but am I sitting there doing the JavaScripting? No.
100%. Yep.
So what I like to do is when I quote unquote pass things over the fence, I write up the functional requirement. So I split up the spec into functional details and, spec notes. And the functional requirements, I'll type it up and share with them in basic English, nothing fancy, but I'll say, okay, the customer is trying to automate their claims processing so that they can automatically ship out parts, let's say. And then I go through all of the different details of what we're trying to do and what the business has told me. And then I'll say, here's my guess at it, but I want you to read this, think about it, and come meet with me, and we'll write out the actual spec together. So yeah, I'll send them all of my brain dump of like what the business needs. And then I'll say, okay, we probably need a plugin. I think this is how it'll work, blah, blah, blah. But I intentionally don't spend as much time on the technical notes, more on the functional notes. And then we'll schedule a call and kind of go through it, and they'll pick holes at it. They'll say, do you care about this filter? Do you care about this trigger or something else? And 9 times out of 10, every suggestion that they have, I go with.
Yeah. Nice.
So that's how I rope them in.
That's so good. So good.
Then I also get less bugs coming back because we've collaborated on the technical design together. So when it comes back, I'm like, oh yeah, we did talk about that. Like now that I've thought about it longer, like I want to change it, but everything that comes back to me is what we talked about. I'm not surprised and there's no interpretation.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. How do you, so this is another culture question, but not the differences in culture. How do you maintain the Hitachi culture across all your remote teams, whether it be nearshore, offshore, remote, in person? How do you maintain consistent culture, the Hitachi culture, no matter where people are located?
Oh, I mean, that's that's a great question. So we have quite a few consultants in North America. also in India. And my specific company is the North America one, but we have Hitachi Solutions UK, Hitachi Solutions Japan, and all of those kind of roll up into one unit. For North America, how we kind of keep our culture alive is we have a group called Kansai. If you Google Kansai Hitachi Solutions, you'll see it on our About Us page. And what we try to do is basically encourage diversity and inclusivity. And we have a team channel actually where all of our different locations, like primary hubs, are not just offices, like say Seattle. Seattle isn't an office, but we have quite a few consultants in Seattle. And we just encourage local meetups. So Seattle, a little while ago, they had a dinner and they played like mini golf, and some of our top leaders are based out of Seattle, so they were able to attend and, you know, kind of give that small company feel, even though we're kind of a bigger company. So that's one way that we keep that culture. We also do internal calls where we talk about varying topics. One that's been one of my favorite that we had was last year. It's about what motivates you. And we we actually had different polls and we had different questions, and people could automatically answer and kind of do that. But yeah, just a lot of internal communication, making sure people feel heard. That's really how we can keep the culture alive and growing.
Interesting. So do you do anything, so is there anything explicit that you make sure the culture translates across the world, not just in the local market? I'll tell you what I'm driving at here. So my wife works for Google, and they have a thing there called googliness. And wherever you are in Google around the world, if you're acting googly, people will compliment you for it. And if you're not acting googly, in other words, you've been a prick, been an idiot, people will go, that's not very googly, and everyone instantly knows what's been said through that. And it doesn't matter whether you're in, I've been to Singapore, Sydney, I've been to Oslo, I've been to London, multiple London offices. I've been to all these offices within Google, and it translates. Doesn't matter, all those people are all from very different cultures, but it translates because it's part of the DNA of the organization. And I just wonder, because, your company is a large global, GSI, is there anything being done to maintain global culture that is, if an international customer is dealing with you in one office as opposed to another, they would get the same experience culturally from you?
We definitely are doing stuff, but it's not as in your face as googly versus not googly. I'm going to have to bring this to our leadership team to see if we can, have something that's so in your face like that. I love it, to be honest. But yeah, we do drive for consistency for all of our customers. We do have different pillars of strength. We kind of abide by those. They kind of went through a rebranding earlier this year. There was 11 originally, and it's been condensed down to 3. But yeah, I think it's very important that our customers get the same experience from everyone.
So good, so good. Okay, let's talk about change management now, because I know that's another area that you're passionate about. First of all, how did you get into change management, and what is your definition of change management?
Okay, so how I got into change management, it really is the people side of technology. So I have never been a big coder. I don't necessarily love the, just the cool factor. Like, that doesn't do it for me. What does it for me is changing somebody's life. And how you change somebody's life is you improve it for the better by providing them the tools that they need to do their job. So change management for me is understanding somebody's current pain point and then planning through the change for them to the end state, quote unquote, because obviously change is continual. There's not really an end state. But change management, I love it just because it is the most important aspect to a project. And it is almost always the first thing that is cut, sadly. C-suite and really anyone that's in a leadership position, they are about to spend, potentially millions of dollars on licenses and configuration, and then really what they're looking for is return on investment, right? They need to make sure that their teams are not getting burnt out, they have high employee satisfaction, and their employees are able to do things faster and more efficiently. So they're looking for return on investment.
Yeah.
But they shoot themselves in the foot, right? Because they'll say, hey, I want high ROI and I'm going to spend, millions of dollars, but in order to cut costs, I'm going to cut out change management. And it's like the easiest way to get higher ROI is to include change management. So yeah, that's kind of like the catch-22, I would say, with most projects. It's almost always the first to go.
Okay, so my question is, why is it the first to go? Is it because the benefits to that customer hasn't been communicated about what change does? Is it they haven't seen like the cost benefit analysis of it? Why do you think? Because, I'm 100% with you. I've been on projects where when something wants to be, or when the salesperson or the BDM wants to cut something, this is an area that seems like, it likes the scalpel's knife. And it's like, well, hang on a second. You've just said yourself, it's one of the key indicators of ROI if an effective change management program happens. So why is it the area that the cutting is done in is change?
Well, I think part of it's probably old school mentality. They equate change management to training, and then they see the dollar amount on change management and they think, oh, we can just train internally. And why would we have to spend so much on training? But change management training is like a tenth of what actually change management is. If you think change management is training, you're looking at it completely wrong. Change management, and this is really where things kind of break down, because you can do change management for everything. It doesn't have to be for, a technology change, but the acronym I like is ADCAR. It's from ProSci, but it's awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And where people mess up the most is awareness, because they'll communicate out, hey, we're making a change. This is a mandatory change.
Yep.
CEO is saying you have to
land down the
CRM.
law.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The part that's never communicated almost across the board is why. Why is this now mandatory? Why is CRM so critical? And no one's communicating that. The C-suite probably knows it. They need it because, hey, we're not profitable right now, or we need to do X, Y, and Z to satisfy our shareholders, or, so like there's reasons behind it, but it's almost never communicated outwards, like downwards and sideways, why a new technology tool is being forced upon them. And so, yeah, I just rambled a whole bunch. Like, obviously I can get off my soapbox right now, but
Good.
Yeah, whenever change management is cut, I think it's because the people making the decisions either believe it's purely training, or they don't understand their communication breakdowns. They might think, obviously our boots on the ground know why we have to implement CRM. But time after time, when we panel those people or, get survey results, they have no clue why they're using it. And they would think, oh, it's just for reporting purposes. Like, it's not actually to benefit me, right? So that it's a struggle for sure, but I would almost argue it's smarter to reduce scope rather than reduce change management.
Yeah, agreed. I can remember the day sitting in an office in Sydney, on George Street in Sydney, with a change manager across from me who was ProSci certified, and he stepped me through it, and the light bulb came on for me on all the projects I had been involved in up to that point that hadn't worked out, and I was like, this is the missing link. This is the key reason why. And after that point, I did a lot of training around ADCAR and ProSci. The company I was working with at the time were ProSci trainers. So it didn't just affect our projects. We're part of a larger consulting group that they provided, independent change managers into corporate accounts. And The thing is that if you look at particularly the stuff that ProSci talk about up front, the statistical analysis that's been done, it's almost like, I find if you go through that with the C-suite, at the conclusion of it, they are 100% understand, like, we would be stupid not to do this. I think it's an area that BDMs and salespeople need to fundamentally learn why it's critical for the success of the project. If their longer term compensation is associated with the success of the project as well, I suppose, because at the end of the day, if it's not, and that all depends on the structure of the org to how important it is. So is this something that's you specific or company wide, or those involved in these projects, you try and consistently add a change component to your projects?
We try to bake it into every engagement. So we have a change management department that specializes just in, ProSci and ADCAR and other change management methodologies. They're ramping up in size, but a lot of our consultants outside of that department are also pretty in the know on ADCAR. We try to, our flagship projects go through this original sort of workshop type engagement. And as part of the workshop, we go through an entire day basically of just change management, talking about, basically knowledge transfer up front, like why we're doing this, teaching them about ProSci and all of the statistical stuff that supports it. And then going into kind of workshopping what communication channels would be required and who the stakeholders are. And there's a whole list of stuff that we do with our flagship customers.
Tell me, have you ever been in a situation where a customer has been resistant on paying, what it costs to have change implemented? And, sometimes it takes more than one person full time, depending on the size of the project. One project I was on, we were combining 4 companies together, so 4 different CRM systems, 4 acquisitions, major rail customers, so they all individually own their own rail logistics businesses, and everyone had their own terminology for their division, and theirs was the right way and everybody else's was wrong.
That's always how it goes.
It wasn't just change around the software implementing, in other words, taking 4 disparate systems and doing away with all of them and replacing it with the one, but also like what I call a single thesaurus, right? A single language, or how we're going to refer to these things now. And, we had multiple change people, not just on our side, but also on the customer side. And it was a massively successful project. And I think it was because of that change component. What do you do or have you got an example where a customer has been resistant to it and you've taken them on a journey for them to see the light, so to speak?
Yeah. So the sad truth is, I think a lot of customers go through that, because we all know there's never a dream project. Every project has its own unique challenges and, issues. And when those happen, there's people on the project that kind of look at the remaining work and how much budget's been spent and things like that. And their natural first thought is, okay, is this really providing value? And let's cut it out. And that thing is change management, sadly. How I have tried to get ahead of it with some customers is, and I'm going to sound like a total dork and circle it back to the beginning, but I actually kind of use Six Sigma, like not directly, but if you can start off the project really strong with basically showing them with data that their teams are kind of clueless, then you can measure throughout. I'm thinking of this one in particular where we were rolling out field service mobile. And what we did was, because they weren't really buying into the change management stuff, they're like, we're just going to put it on their mobile device and they have to use it. And I'm like, nah, we're not really going to do that. So we did a pilot. And before the pilot started, we collected feedback. It was kind of fun. We did a Microsoft portal so that they could submit the feedback. And we had them, before the project kind of kicked off, answered some generic questions like, what is your sentiment towards, this software that you're using, free text on this, and then how would you rate corporate communications, stuff like that. It was 5 questions. And we asked the pilot people throughout the entire engagement, and we actually saw communication go from a 0 to a 5 out of 5. So we were able to justify for them, yeah, look, like the activities that we're doing around asking for survey feedback and like measuring it, not only did it help us justify what we were doing, because we're like, yeah, this looks good, but it also helped justify to the C-suite why they were paying for it. So it's kind of hard, right? Because if you don't set it up at the beginning to kind of measure your own success, then you're in a pickle later on when they want to stop paying for it. So I like to try to, as part of any change management, set up those milestones for measurement so that when there are questions about, hey, should we actually pay for this change management, we can say, yes, it's working. Look at it. Because it really is a warm and fuzzy type skill set. Like there's, depending on the deliverable type, like if you do it perfectly, which you can't, but if you were to, everyone uses the tool and everyone's happy. And there are still questions about, oh, did we need this? Because look, everyone's amazing. And yeah, you just got to get ahead of that and find a way to have metrics, things that you can define and measure and, be able to graph. So yeah, there's ways
Awesome.
to do that with adoption.
It's good. It's good. It's been great talking to you. Now I'm going to shift gears around some quickfire questions.
Okay.
These are designed to put you on the spot. They're not designed to be business orientated per se, but they are random. They are very random. Okay. First of all, I'm going to ask you a deep question.
Okay.
What is a mistake people often make about you?
A mistake people often make about me. Well, in a remote environment, let me think of my deep one. I'll give you a silly one first. But in a remote environment, people see like my picture and then they'll meet me face to face. And almost every time people are like, oh my God, you're so tall. So I'm like over 5'11". And so, yeah, people don't realize that. And so almost all the time they're like, oh, you're so tall. I'm like, I know, I wish I could change it, but I can't. I guess.
Why would you want to change it?
Well, here we go. This is my maybe my deep personal secret. I will show up on site and I'll be wearing my heels, and so that makes me 6'2", and I look very confident. But I am very at times insecure about the fact that I'm not only am I the only woman in the room, but at times I'm the tallest person in the room. So I'm just like this giant. So I don't know. I am a little self-conscious about that at times.
Fair enough. Okay, here's your random question.
Okay.
You're at a cafe. What type of drink do you order?
Oh, non-fat latte. Always.
There you go. Nice and easy.
Mm-hmm.
Nice and easy. When you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh my gosh, this is so ridiculous, but I have a picture of it because my mom saved it. But when I was like in 3rd grade or something, I had written up that I wanted to be president, not of America or anything, just I wanted to be president. Like I wanted to have authority, I guess. So now I joke, we do some like internal workshops on like career growth and what you want to be when you grow up, right? And I always say, I'm going to be the first non-Japanese CEO of Hitachi. Duh.
Nice. Nice.
President of Hitachi. Yeah, so still working towards it.
I'm going to put you on the spot one step further then on that one. Is that going to happen in 3 years or 5 years or 18 months?
Oh my gosh. I thought you were going to say 18 years. And I was like, that one. That's nope. The one.
Most people can't set goals beyond 5 years, as in statistically.
No, I know. I'm working towards my goals. I was selected as executive intern. So I'll be working directly with our North America COO and president. Yeah, starting in December though. So I'm making some waves. I'm working towards my goals.
I love it. Yeah. Awesome. Would you rather not have arms or legs, and why?
Oh, those are I was waiting for the second choice.
It's either arms or legs. Which would you prefer to keep or lose, and why?
Oh my gosh, that's really difficult. I think, I'm going to regret this choice, but I think legs, because I'm not very coordinated. So like, I know there's a lot of people out there that can, they don't have arms and they're able to do everything in their day-to-day life, like type on the computer with their toes and things like that. And just knowing my body I would not be able to function without my arms. It'd be too rough.
It's good. It's good. If you could instantly be an expert on one subject, what would it be?
Instantly be an expert. Honestly, human behavior. That's like the biggest skill. Like I try to learn, but if I could understand that better, I would do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's a goodie. Last question, very last question. What's your worst habit?
Worst habit? Starbucks, probably. I mean, I'm buying a venti latte every day. So like, not only is it probably bad for my heart, but it's bad for my bank account. It's my big vice.
Valid.
Yeah.
Valid. Jackie, it's been great talking to you. Do you have any guest recommendations for the future?
Yes.
As another podcast. Anyone you recommend?
I think you should really bug Greg Gant. I mean, I was talking about change management. Most of what I've learned, besides the internet, has come from him. He's a rock star. You should pick his brain on some stuff. Nice.
I like that. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. If people want to connect with you online, are you on Twitter, LinkedIn, anything like that?
Yes, LinkedIn, I'm there. I do have a Twitter, but I am not super active on there, but I will provide that. Yeah, those are the two main ways.
Hey, thanks again for joining us on the Dynamics 365 Practice Show. Full show notes can be found for this episode at nz365guide.com/138. I'm your host, Business Applications MVP, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. I look forward to you tuning in again with me next week. Ciao for now.